Good afternoon. I'm Mike Larson from Tracti Building Systems. Does this sound good? I'm good? Okay. Today I want to talk about building in small markets, secondary markets, tertiary markets, especially at an event like this. It's always very interesting to me that when you talk to somebody about a facility, they typically think they're mentioning something of 60, 70, 80,000 square feet, a very large site. That's what this industry considers a facility. But for every one of those being built, there's probably 15 to 20 smaller sites, 20,000, 25,000 square feet that are built in smaller areas, filling in unmet demand in smaller markets. Especially in the last 5 years, we've also seen a huge amount of mega facilities being built. 100,000, 120,000, 150,000 square feet, 3, 4, 5-story buildings, which is a huge capital outlay and a much bigger risk, a much bigger business venture to go into. A small market, you can do a smaller phased project, much less capital outlay, much less risk. So this is a drone footage of a small remotely run site, which I'll talk about a little more detail later. But 3 buildings, it's about 15,000 square feet in a rural community in upstate New York. Now these sites can start small and grow. I've been doing this for 25 years. Scares me when I say that because I didn't think I'd be in this industry for 25 years, but I've been doing it that long. And I have facilities that started with 1 building and now have 16 or 17. And they never thought they'd get that big. But they filled the first one, and then 2 years later they built another one. And 3 years later they built 2 more. And then they built 2 more and 2 more. And they're like, when is it going to stop? But eventually, as the population and demographic has grown into their market, they've filled up. So here's his little kiosk vestibule there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Building in a small market is different than building in a large market. Self-storage is in most towns, even up to 200, or as small as 250 people. My wife grew up in her hometown, 496 people, that has 3 self-storage sites. Now, the first site is 2 buildings, the second site is 1 building, and the third site is 3 buildings. Now, those are sites. None of them have an on-site management. They're all run remotely. One is built adjacent to the gas station Quickie Mart in town, where the existing staff rent the units, lease the units to the tenants, and the other 2 are run from cell phones remotely. They start out small. They embrace that phasing process. They start with 1 building, 2 buildings, 3 buildings. They're typically not managed on site. They have you need usually 35, 40,000 square feet to justify an on-site manager. So most of these projects are under that size requirement, so you really embrace that off-site management concept. You typically don't see a lot of climate control in these facilities. That's something that could differentiate you if you were going to build in a market that didn't have any. A lot of climate control is becoming more and more commonplace, and people are expecting it. And it's funny, I have a lot of facilities that have climate control. They rent a lot of non-climate control, but they rented it because they had climate control. People called them because they had heated and cooled units available or were marketing that, and then realized they didn't necessarily want it, and then they rented standard units. But they got that call because they had that as one of their available products. So how do you figure out the demand? If you're in a town that doesn't have any self-storage, obviously there's demand. The demand is going somewhere. My wife's hometown, 496 people. There's the 3 self-storage sites. The 2 closest towns to her don't have any self-storage. Galesville, which is 4 miles away, doesn't allow self-storage. It's not allowed on the books. It's not allowed as a use. So many people have tried to get self-storage approved there and been denied. Trempealeau, 5 miles the other direction, is on the Mississippi River. Real estate is much more expensive there, and the property taxes are much more expensive there. So economically, the self-storage isn't feasible for that market. So the people from Galesville and the people from Trempealeau are all going to Ettrick to get that demand met. Typically, if you're going to build a site, a 60,000 square foot plus site, you hire a feasibility consultant, and they're going to charge you somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 to determine if there's a demand in your market. I do a series of seminars across the country where we talk about how you can do your own first, and that's what I would really recommend you do for a small site. On our website, we have a competition evaluation form, and what you would do is you would look at all the sites in your market, draw either a 5-mile, 7-mile, say 9-mile radius around the location that you're looking to build, and determine all the existing sites that are there. Some of them you might not even know about. They might have been built years ago, first generation facilities back on industrial property when it was called mini warehousing and it was viewed as a warehouse, and they were kind of tucked back out of the way. They don't have any internet presence. They might not even be in the phone book anymore. They're probably full and out of the way, and why do they need to advertise to tell people they don't have any units for them to rent? You can get on Google Earth and look at sites from the sky, and you can measure them out. They have a measurement tool. I prefer you actually go to each site and put eyes on it. You want to look at the number of buildings they have. Small doors are 5 feet wide, large doors are 10 feet wide. So if you see a building with 6 small doors on the end and 19 small doors down the side and 10 feet of blank panel, or 19 door curtains down the side, that's a 30 by 200 building, that's 6,000 square feet. So this site has 3 of those buildings, that's 18,000 square feet. The tricky part is trying to figure out how full they are. So you want to look at what units are rented, or what units have unit locks on them, and which units are just vacant unit locks. The unit on the right, on the left, your right, is a rented unit. If you see units with all different types of locks on, those are typically rented units. The unit on the left here is a overlocked unit. That's good information to know too. If you see a site that has a lot of units that are overlocked, why aren't people paying? What's going on? Why is this being mismanaged? Definitely good information for you to know in your marketplace. I recommend all units have some type of lock on it. So the one on the right is a cylinder lock for vacant unit locks, and the one on the left is a key tag, Chateau cells. It's similar to what you see on your electric meter. That way, as an owner or manager, you can drive around the facility very easily and see if something's amiss. If one of the units doesn't have one of these 4 photos on it, something's wrong. Either somebody moved out and you didn't get notice, somebody, which happens surprisingly more than you'd expect, put their stuff in and forgot to put the lock on and went home, or somebody's had a break-in. So on a daily basis or every couple days, if you do a lock check, you definitely want to check and see what's going on. A lot of older existing sites aren't internet savvy. They don't have a web presence. Today, it's shifting. You want to have some type of web presence. It's fairly inexpensive to do, but you want to get, people don't know what's going on. Our smartphones have made us really not very smart. So until we know where things are on our smartphone, we can't find things. I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old, and if their smartphone doesn't tell them something, they don't know it. They don't know anybody's phone number anymore. They don't ask anything because you can just Google it. So a lot of older sites don't have that, and then you miss out on the people that do a Google search for self-storage in an area. So if your self-storage is in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, and you type in self-storage St. Johnsbury, Vermont, you're going to get pulled up, whereas somebody that doesn't have that presence isn't going to have that draw and be able to find your location. It also gives you the ability, you can reserve units online, they can pay online. A lot of the older sites don't take credit cards too, so having that advantage. One of our customers in Bloomington, Illinois has a very nice office, and he has a kiosk out front. How many people are familiar with kiosks? Okay. He's got a very nice kiosk out front, and you open the door and you come into the kiosk vestibule, and then there's a door that goes into the office. And he's got a pretty good track record of watching people that enter, that when they get out of their car, if they're under 30, they'll open the door to the kiosk, they'll come in, they'll kind of peer, see him, they'll go to the kiosk. They'll avoid talking with him, and they'll complete the entire transaction on the kiosk rather than have the human interaction. If it's somebody my age, they walk right past the kiosk because there's somebody to talk to, and I can chat and tell them all kinds of interesting stories, and they'll listen to me for a few minutes. So generationally, you're seeing this. So this internet thing's catching on. I hate to tell you, sure it's news to you, but you want to make sure you're on board with that train. In looking at a facility, in doing a demand study, there's two big methods that everybody at this show will tell you. There's the demand propensity factor, which is by population. It's a population in a radius times a per square foot number, and then there's a household method. Now that works, both these methods work great, and they're usually fairly consistent, but that's for a site of 60,000, 70,000 square feet. For a small facility, these numbers are very difficult to, these methods are difficult to make work. I think you have to go grassroots and go right down to what are the occupancy of the existing sites in a market. So you want to look at, if you have 3 sites in your area, and you call them all, and 2 2 of them don't call you back. You've called several times. The third one you talk to and they say they don't have any units available and they put you on a waiting list. That's a very good indicator that there's a lot of demand left in that market. If you go to a site and you see you do your lock check and you see lots of vacant units, especially in an older facility, something that's maybe been there for a few years, that means that's an area that probably has a lot of unrented product, and that would cause me to look somewhere else. Typically, you're doing all outside access drive-up units. 40-foot wide buildings are the most popular, 30 being a very close second. Maybe some 20-foot wides if you're doing them around the perimeter of the building, depending on what type of, what part of the country you're building in, if you're using like a fortress style. Average unit size is close to a 10 by 15. So a 30,000 square foot site probably will have about 220 units. Now, what can differentiate you in your self-storage development is your security. Older sites that don't have cameras, don't have keypad access gates, aren't fenced, aren't well lit. This industry is going the way of the hotels. So sites with nicer amenities, sites that are cleaner, more secure, will do well against older sites, and also they get a good price differentiation. If you think about it when you travel, the lowest price hotel in the area usually doesn't have the best occupancy rate. You'll see the no-tell motel for $59 a night. Most people aren't going to stay there if there's a nice new Hilton Garden Inn or Holiday Inn Express that's probably $50 to $60 more per night. Again, they don't have a lot of temperature controlled. So if you can add heated and cooled units, that might give you some differentiation in a marketplace. So if the existing sites are above 90% rented, which this is a good little nugget to take away. You never want to be 100% in this industry. If you're 100% rented, 2 things should be happening. 1, you should be raising your rates. 2, you should be looking for expansion, because if you're not, somebody else is looking to tap that demand. And if you're 100% rented, you're leaving money on the table. If you've got 100 units and you're charging $100 a month, that's $10,000. If you were at $110 a month, you only need to rent 95 of the units, and you're actually making more money. If you're $120 a month, 85 units, you're still making more than you were at 100% at $100 a month, and now you still have product to rent. Older sites you'll typically see there's some complacency in this industry. Old sites, first generation facilities that are full. The owners have now retired to Florida. They're getting a check every month. They don't want to raise the rates. They don't want to rock the boat. You'll see those sites probably have a 20% lower rental rate than a new site that comes in with better security, cameras, a keypad access gate system. Climate control, again, that might be something that even on a small scale might differentiate you, give you something new to a marketplace. You'll find a lot of demand nationwide for boat RV units. But the question is, are you going to be able to make money at it? If you're a 10 by 10 unit, 100 square feet is $100 a month. You're making $1 a square foot. If you're doing outside access parking for an RV unit, say you get $50 a month. How much would somebody pay for a unit big enough to park their RV? To get your $1 a square foot, you're not going to get. No one's going to pay you for a 15 by 40 unit, $600 a month. At best, maybe you'd get $450 a month. But that's still a pretty high-end marketplace to be able to get $450 a month for a 15 by 40 unit. And the building is more expensive, the labor is more expensive, and it takes up more land. So at $450 a month, is about 60-some cents a square foot? So you're making 40% less return on your income with a higher expense. And are you in a market where it's going to rent all year round? You don't want to build something that you're only going to make 60% of the return you'd make on standard storage, and you're only going to rent it 40 or 70% of the time, or 7 months out of 12 months. So you've done your due diligence. You've looked at the existing sites in your market, or you're in a town that doesn't have any self-storage. You have, or you have adjacent land, you have an existing business, you can add self-storage as a component, very low risk, very low capital outlay. Now you need to know economically, does it make sense? What are the parameters economically that are going to make the difference? On 1 acre of land, you're usually going to get 30 to 38% coverage, 14,000 to 17,000 square feet. That's standard outside access drive-up units, 30-foot 30 feet on the ends of the buildings, 25 feet between the buildings. That's typically what your fire marshal wants to see. A good note to remember also, touch base with the fire marshal early on. Your municipality might have different fire codes than your building code. During the course of my career, I've had people that have gotten their building permit and been in construction, and the fire marshal shows up and says, "Where's your firewalls?" And they said, "Well, here's my building permit. Building official said I didn't need it." "I don't care what the building official said. I'm the fire marshal, and you need to have firewall." Turns out there was a little politics. It was his ex-brother-in-law. They both hated each other, but the owner's stuck in the middle here, and he's like, "Well, what do I do?" So you want to make sure you touch base with all the, get signed off by the fire marshal and the building official, make sure everybody's on the same page. If you're going to build a 50,000 square foot site, you're probably going to need 3 to 4 acres. One of the biggest regrets most customers have is not having land to expand on. You can start with a small facility, but having an option to get additional land would be very advantageous for you. If you build wider buildings with a center hallway, you're going to get more coverage per square foot. You cut down the number of driveways and add more building space. But now you're creating a little different product. You're going to have inside access units off of a hallway. Typically, those are going to be heated and cooled, but doesn't necessarily have to be all the time. But if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you have some type of ventilation system to move that air around inside that corridor. You want to look at what type of zoning works in your municipality. I mentioned earlier, some municipalities don't have self-storage on the books at all. So you'd like to find, if they do have self-storage as one of the acceptable uses in the area you're looking at, look for property that has that. Look for that type of real estate. That'll save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. If they don't, what's the process to get a conditional use permit or go through a zone change? Go to the city official and find out. You might find out that they've had several people try self-storage in the past and they've flatly denied it all. So you need to know going in, is it going to take me a 2-year battle? Is it going to be a legal process? What's going to be involved to fight to get this approved? Also, converting residential or agricultural land to commercial or industrial, which are the typical 2 types of real estate that work for self-storage, can be very difficult. So if you find a great piece of property that's zoned agricultural or zoned residential, know going in that it's going to be very difficult to try to get that change. Not 100% of the time. If it's non-conforming, if you find a piece of residential land that's surrounded by businesses on 3 sides and it's on a major thoroughfare and it's fairly obvious that no one's going to build a home or apartment on it, you might have a shot at it then, but definitely something you want to consider. We've seen a lot more conversions. That's where you have an existing vacant building. With the rise of the internet and Amazon and all the delivery services, you're seeing a lot of brick and mortar stores that are going dark. So municipalities are very pro-development for that. They'd like to see you do something with something like that, something that's been sitting vacant. But maybe you don't need that much storage. So maybe there's a 50,000 square foot old Walmart where they've now built a new giant supercenter 2 miles away, but you don't need demand for 50,000 square feet of storage in that market. Maybe you develop 25,000 square feet of self-storage and then convert the other 2 into a 2-unit strip plaza, something like that. If you Google, or not Google, you can do an internet search for, most municipalities now have a website that shows their zoning. So here we typed in self-storage, and it says that it's on, this you can do in type B3 general business. And then this is another example in our town, in Dane County, Wisconsin. It says it's on C2 commercial. Now, it's very hard to see, but on the top it says this is for reference purposes only. Best thing is to call the building official because each site is going to be different, and you'd like to get that recommendation or that input from the building official's mouth. If you can get a map and draw out, or not draw out, but search for property that is the proper zoning, that'll save you a lot of time and effort as well. Don't look for property in the gold, which is residential, or the green, which is agricultural, knowing that that's not priced right, and you might have a huge legal battle to try to convert that to the business or the commercial or industrial. When laying out the site, even though you're only going to build maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 buildings in the first phase, You want to lay out the whole site. You want to plan ahead. So if the site does grow and ends up being a 10-building site, and I'm going to put an on-site office on it, where would that office be? Where would my fence be? Where would my gate be? Will I have access to the office from outside of the gate? We want to plan for all these things in advance, and a lot of municipalities will want to see it too. I actually have a site under construction right now where he's building one building, but his site plan shows 20. It's his dream. Hopefully he'll build all 20, but the city said, well, we want to see exactly what you're going to do. And then he got his site plan approved for all 20 buildings at one time. You also want to make sure where you're putting that gate. You want to make sure you have that as a plan. You don't want it to be in the wrong spot. You want to have it where it'll flow, traffic will flow in right lined up with one of the main drives. And if you're going to build an office, that'll be outside that gate, so you'll have access to park outside. And also far enough off the street that if a truck can turn off the street and where the gate location would be, they won't be impeding traffic.
How far off the street?
I'd say probably 40 feet, at least. Different municipalities are going to have different regulations on that, but I would say a minimum of 40 feet. So here's the site plan we've laid out. It's 3.5 acres. We've got 350 units, 56,500 square feet. Now we're only planning to build the first 3 buildings in phase 1, but we've got our office shown, which we might not build till phase 3 or 4, but we planned ahead and thought about it. I'm a big advocate of this, the phasing process. It lets you build and expand slowly. You build up the first phase, you get cash flow out of that, that'll help build on additional phases, and also lets you change the unit mix. I love these sites that, it's 150,000 square foot 5-story, and they're micromanaging the unit mix. I think we need 32 5x5s and 47 5x15s. That is crazy. The chances of picking the exact unit mix you need that early on is like a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling a car. So it's you want to have some flexibility to be able to adapt and change to that. What type of building do you want to build? Do you want to build metal? Are you going to build wood? Are you going to build block? Later on when the expo hall opens, you'll see that there is no wood manufacturers that come to this event. The primary construction material in this industry is steel. Steel with block, brick, Nichi-ha panel, wood, some type of wood paneling, something aesthetic is added on to the metal, but almost all the sites being built today are metal frame with some type of add-on to it for an aesthetic purposes. What roof pitch do you want? Most of the sites, the fastest, most economical, easiest to build is a low pitch building, but some municipalities don't want that anymore. They want something that looks a little more attractive. They want something with a higher pitch, maybe something that doesn't have ribbed panel facing the road, something that doesn't have doors facing the road. So you want to look at do you have an architectural review board? When you go in and tell them you're going to build a self-storage facility, they're going to close their eyes and think of the worst site they've ever seen, and they think that's what you're going to build. You want to show them that that's not the case. So I think a photo is definitely, the old adage, it's worth 1,000 words. I would definitely get that in front of them right away. This is what I want to build. It's going to look, it's going to be classic beige buildings with evergreen 312 pitch roofs and doors, or matte black, or I'm going to do Nichi-ha panel, and this is how I'm going to landscape it. You want to show them that it's going to be something attractive and nice, an addition to the community. So here's a low pitch building, the fastest, most economical. This is a small site I did right outside of Niagara Falls. It's 14,000 square feet, 4 buildings. Here's a higher pitch building. This is a wood frame building. A lot of municipalities do like this. They're both designed for the same snow load and the same wind load. The only advantage on the higher pitch is the aesthetics. You rent by the square footage, but in all actuality, if you open the door of a higher pitch building, you look up and you see you have more cubic footage. You don't rent by more cubic footage, but as a marketing tactic, people will see, oh wow, I'm getting so much more space. Here's a block perimeter building. Normally, we don't see as much of this anymore. There was the perception that block is stronger, which it is, but if people hit the building, it's a lot easier to replace a metal jam than it is to replace a block jam. And if they hit it with the car, they're going to break it either way. Here's a high-pitched metal building with fake Nichi-ha panel. two different types on the end. One looks like a fake stone, one looks like a fake brick, and they've got the doors down the side. Here's a wood frame building with metal exterior. You want to check on your regulations in your town. The reason steel's become the predominant construction material in this industry is the construction type. It's type 2B non-combustible construction in the IBC code. I've had people that have, when they were going to build wood frame buildings, it's not type 2B construction and it's a different type. And they had to have different requirements for driveway widths and sprinkler requirements. So a site that laid out with 6 metal buildings with 25-foot drives in between would end up being only 4 buildings with wood frame with 35-foot drives in between. There's a combination building. It's got 312 pitch with block on the end and then block jams down the whole side. Here's a combination building. This was a municipality that they wanted the 312 pitch look along the street. So the first 20 feet of the first 4 buildings in the front, we did as 312 pitch, and then we went back to the lower, more economical low pitch behind it. Now this site has, phase 1 was the 4 buildings in front. 4 buildings, 3,000 square feet, 12,000 square feet in phase 1. 3 years later, they built 21,000 square feet of phase 2. 2 years after that, they built 21,000 square feet of phase 3. And now this picture actually doesn't show it. There's a couple more buildings on this side. So what started out as 12,000 square feet in 7 years is now up over 60,000 square feet. Small projects, you typically end up being your own general contractor. So what that means is you're going to have to learn the construction industry. Even before you get to number 1, these are the people who you're going to have contracts with. You're going to work with an engineer. You're going to work with a civil engineer that's going to help lay out the site plan and do your drainage plan. If you're anything over an acre, in almost all the states that are on the International Building Code, anything over an acre needs a drainage plan or a water detention plan. So my recommendation is you want to, before you purchase any piece of property, put the offer in contingent on getting the approvals. You want to make sure you're getting land, you buy land that you're going to be able to do what you want on. So your first contact is going to be that engineer that you're going to have to do the site plan with, to go to the town to try to get your approvals. Typically, you're going to have to submit that site plan. They're going to kick it back. They're going to say they want to see what the drive widths are, the turn radiuses. They might want a traffic study to determine how many cars are going to be in, because they all think that self-storage is like a Dunkin' Donuts drive-through and there's going to be 30 cars lined up every day to get in there, which is not the case at all. So you contract with that person. Then you're going to contract with an excavator. They're going to execute that plan that your engineer came up with. So they're going to clear the site, they're going to bring in fill, they're going to set the grades according to what that engineer has done for you. Then you have your concrete contractor for your concrete pads for the buildings, and then your paving company if you're going to pave the drives. Some municipalities will want paved drives and have that as a specification. Others will allow you to do crushed gravel or crushed stone. It's a little dustier, it's a little messier. Some people will, as a later phase, come in and phase it, or come in and do the paving. Maybe in phase 1, you build the buildings, you do crushed stone driveways, and then phase 3 or 4, after you've got some more cash flow going in, an upgrade will be when you pave the driveways. Your metal building, what do you say? Your building company that you're going to contract with, the electrician for your security lighting. Also, if you're going to do a keypad access gate to run the power for that. Your heating, ventilation, air conditioning contractor if you're going to do climate control. Your gate security company if you're going to do a keypad access gate. Your fencing contractor. And then if you do build an office, your office build-out contractor. When talking with your concrete contractor, the foundation type, typically for self-storage buildings, it's a floating slab or a monolithic slab or an Alaskan slab. It's a 16-inch deep, 12-inch wide perimeter around the building with a notch, and then it tapers up into a 4 to 7-inch thick pad, depending on what your snow load is and where you are in the country. That's what we've seen for years and years in this industry. The code is changing a little bit in some areas, and they're going to want you to do other things. They might want you to do a trench wall or a frost wall, which In my opinion, I've seen buildings that were 40 years old built on a floating slab that are very, the slabs are in excellent shape. My engineer, who's stamped in all 50 states, he typically will write letters for us. If your building official says, oh wait, you can't, you've got stamped foundation plans from us, and you submit them, and your building official says, oh no, we can't do a floating slab, you need to have a frost wall. Okay, well, my engineer who designed the plans will write a letter explaining why, in his opinion, that it meets the code, and we've had very good success with that. In our state, Wisconsin, we've had people that have built, they're on building number 14. Buildings 1 through 13 are all on a floating slab, and now the code changed where they said, oh, they won't allow a floating slab anymore, and they're making them do a pier foundation, which is different. You drill a hole every 10 feet, 8 inches around, and fill it with concrete and rebar, and then put the floating slab on top of that. It really doesn't make much sense, because if the slab's gonna move, that pier probably will move with it as well, but it's what's currently being enforced. The funny thing is, they kind of figured out that it really wasn't doing anything, so the next version of the code, they're gonna take it back off. But the people that are building, did they take it off? They just did. So the people that built this year had to do it. So you'll have 13 buildings with floating slab, 1 building with this pier foundation, and then your next one goes back. Good. It was like a Band-Aid and a heart attack. It didn't make any sense. So here's a cross section of a floating slab, 16 inches deep, 1 foot wide, tapering back to what that slab thickness is, and then it's got that notch on it. It's basically a 2x10 piece of lumber, 9¼ inches by 1½ inches deep, and that's where the door goes down in front of or in that notch. So you have a little extra protection if any water comes up to the edge of the door. Now this has got 4 inches of free draining, good fill under that, so your excavator is gonna come in, scoop out that dirt, bring in that 4 inches of fill. So here's the stakes on around the edge there, are the edges of the building. The driveway's in between, they haven't gravelled yet, but they've dug out and then brought in that new fill. Here they've laid down the plastic vapor barrier, the welded wire fabric, rebar around the perimeter, and they've got that notch set. And you want to make sure they pull that notch or that lumber off and trowel that out. The left is your right, sorry, is a very good slab. It's got a nice smooth finish on the outside. The building on the right probably has the exact same finish on the inside, but they didn't pull that form off early enough, and now it's got a moonscape on it, which is very unsightly and will drive you crazy as an owner. And it can get so bad that some of those pockmarks can be deep enough that now the anchor bolt that's supposed to drill into the concrete to make sure the building adheres to the snow load and the wind load might not have enough to adhere to. So now you've got to come back with some high density concrete epoxy and fill it in. And an annoyance and something that could be avoided. Here's a different version where they've got kind of a slip form and they're troweling out. Most of the United States now is on some version of the IBC, the International Building Code, and the 2012 version and the 2015 version have an additional component called the IECC, the International Energy Compliance Code, which dictates what R value of insulation you need in the roof and walls. It actually is based on the overall energy consumption of your building. So you'll need an architect if you're going to do a heated and cooled building like that, and they do something called a COM check. And it takes into account what zone you're in, the overall square footage of the building, and then they want to look at what type of furnace you're putting in, what type of air conditioning system you're putting in, and what type of lighting you're putting in. And then it enters in this COM check program, and it says, okay, if you did an R38 in the roof and a continuous R19 in the walls, you'll pass the code by 1%. Oh, or nope, it says you failed by 4%. Okay, if we did an R43 in the roof and an R19 in the walls, okay, now you pass by 2%. So it's very detailed and very elaborate. It's only going to get more stringent. The 2018 version of the code is slowly, eventually they want a building that is almost, produces very little carbon footprint. You want to make sure that they pull that form off. Here's an example where they didn't. They used a vibratory screed The guy on the right's trying to force that concrete up under that notch, but they didn't get it all the way under there. They didn't pull it off, and now you've got to basically have to come in and cut that out. Now it's obviously it's on your concrete guy, but you've got a timeline that you want to adhere to. You've got buildings coming. You want to get built. You want to get open. You want to get something called income. You've paid enough. You've got plenty of outgo, so you definitely want to get things moving. You want to do saw cuts in the building for expansion joints. You want to make sure you stay off of those 10-foot structural lines because that's where you're going to be drilling in your anchor bolts. So start 9 feet or 11 feet in from the edge of your building and then go every 20 or 30 feet. Oh, thank you. I didn't see her. If you have to do, if your code changes, like Wisconsin, where we had to do the piers, if you have to do the pier, I don't know, how much does it cost to add piers to your foundation? Okay. If you have to do a trench wall, it adds probably $1 a square foot. So if your floating slab foundation was going to be $5.50 a square foot formed and poured, you're probably up to $6.50 a square foot if you have to do a trench wall. If you have to do a full-blown frost wall with a footer, it probably adds $1.50 to $2 a square foot. So again, this is information you want to know going in because it's going to change your initial costs and actually affect your ROI. If you do a block perimeter building, the weight of the block cannot sustain or cannot sit on a floating slab, so it's going to cause you to have to do that trench wall to support the weight. So here's a cross-section of a trench wall. It's just a, here's the piers. So they dig these holes 8 inches wide, 10 feet, or every 10 feet down the building, fill them with concrete, insert some rebar into it, and then they put the floating slab on top of it. Now the trench wall is they've taken a small bucket and they've scooped out a 12-inch or 10-inch wide trench around the perimeter of the building, filled that with concrete, so your soil is acting as the forms of the building, and they put the rebar in it, then you put the floating slab on top of that. The frost wall is you actually form up a footer and then you form up a wall, fill that with concrete. Now this is typically what you have to do on heated and cooled buildings. In addition, you might have to put insulation around the perimeter too to meet that IECC code. Here's a nicely done slab. It's got the bollards in on the corner. Here's a site progression. A lot of people do this. So this is a 5-building site. They built 4 buildings in phase 1, but they poured all 5 slabs. So this way they can get up and going. The 5th building is actually on order now, should be delivering soon, and they were able to do that out of cash flow from the first 4 buildings. You'd like to hold your finished grade of your drives down a little bit from the edge of your slab. The photo on the right, we like to design the slab a little bigger than the building. So if you have a 40-foot wide building, we want that slab to be 40 foot 2 inches wide. That way you're making sure the building sits entirely on the slab and you have a little bit of protection, because otherwise the first guy to hit your building will be your paving contractor, and the second guy to hit your building will be your snowplow guy if you're in snow country. So we want to try to avoid that for you. And then if you do your pavement flush right with the edge of that notch, if you get any movement or any heave, you don't want that water to be trapped in that notch. So you'd like to hold that down 1 to 3 inches if you can. When you're doing your site, laying it out, you're going to, your drainage plan that's going to be done by your civil engineer. We can build buildings on a 1% slope. So a 100-foot building can drop from 1 foot to the other end instead of doing steps in the foundation. That's something that we've seen more and more people do. That way, it's a nice gradual run. You can set the finished floor elevations of the buildings differently, north to south, and then slope them east to west as well. Here's a typical site progression. So they've got 1 slab poured with the building already erected on it. They're just waiting to put doors and roof on it and in the interior partition walls. They've got their 2nd pad poured up on top where they're temporarily storing material, and they've got their 3rd pad formed and ready to be poured. I do see some of these large commercial units. This is a 12-foot wide bay with a 12-foot high door, 11-foot wide. It's nice for businesses. They can be an addition to a small facility. Sometimes you want year-round leases for them. It's nice today with people with the internet doing small businesses out of their home. They can expand, and they don't want to do a capital expenditure. They don't want to go through what you're going through. Find property, get approvals, kind of dive in with both feet. They can do year-to-year or a yearly lease with a self-storage facility. In the end, they're probably paying a lot more for it, but the convenience and the adaptability for them makes it easy to do. If you do those deeper units, you want the driveway to be at least 1.5 times the depth of the unit so people can get things in and out. Now again, these are tricky because you want to make sure that you're in a market where you're going to get a high enough rental rate to justify these. Now here's a fully enclosed RV unit. So these are 14-foot high doors, 12-foot wide. Now a typical self-storage door, say a 9-foot wide, 7-foot high roll-up door is say $275. A door like this with a keypad operator is probably $2,000. So in addition to the cost of the building, the cost of that door, you want to make sure that you're getting a reasonable rate of return and that it's going to be something that's going to be rented year-round. If you do an outside canopy, you typically hope to get twice as much rental rate as you do for outside parking. The outside parking, I think, is a phenomenal way to generate income from the property you have. Most new neighborhoods are putting restrictive covenants on campers, boats, RVs, and trailers. So it drives everybody to self-storage because you can't park in your driveway. You only have a limited amount of time, and you can't park it next to your house. So for if you're getting $45, $50 a month, to park things in a graveled area you have on your property, an easy way to generate income quickly. What kind of security do you want to offer? I'm a big advocate of fencing. If your competition's fenced, I absolutely think you need to be fenced. If your competition's not fenced, fencing your site with a gate can be very, very advantageous for you. Cameras, I definitely think cameras, they're very inexpensive these days. For a couple $1,000s, you can get 8 cameras going to a DVR that will record for 30 days. It definitely makes the customers, your tenants, feel secure. And if I'm a thief, it makes me think I want to go somewhere else where I'm not being watched. Individual door alarms, I don't see that as much. I don't see it very much at all, but in very, very high crime areas, I see it. But you're looking at a cost of probably $110 per door. There's different types of fencing. I see typically the black Cyclone fencing, a lot of the aluminum or wrought iron look. It looks a little more attractive than just standard silver chain link. You try to avoid the razor wire on the top. That kind of gives a negative connotation. I think sometimes I've seen somewhere they've got the barbed wire and they've got to tilt it the wrong way. It's almost like they're trying to keep the tenants in. That can send a wrong message. If you do a keypad or you do a fence, I like a keypad gate. That way, each person gets their own code. You can control who enters and who exits. If somebody's delinquent in their rent, they're blocked from getting into the site. This was a customer of mine who has since replaced this. The gate rusted open. No one ever got out and closed the gate. So he paid to put this fence in to have this gate there, and it was never closed. So if you're going to pay to put the fence in, utilize the gate to make sure you're getting the value of it. There's different types of gates. Here's a sliding gate. Here's a vertical gate. Cameras, again, I definitely think any site today, an existing site, a camera addition is a very inexpensive way to upgrade the facility, and all new facilities should definitely figure out a camera plan. It's a family-run business. You can easily run it from an existing site or existing business. So if you look on the far left here, there's the Amber Oak storage. So it's just a small little part of this retail plaza that they're using for the facility, and the buildings are behind it. They built a new office where he runs his real estate from, and especially on a smaller site. Something up to probably 20,000, 25,000, 30,000 square feet, you can probably run it with your existing personnel, and it's not a big management expense. So your break-even percentage is significantly lower because you don't have that management expense in that phase. If you have an existing business, it can give you immediate contacts with the customers. A lot of times it provides good synergies with the existing businesses. If it's not next to the site, make it obvious to get through. With cell phones today, it's fairly easy. You're very accessible. Unfortunately, to our detriment, we're always accessible. So it's nice though that if you have if somebody emails you, you got to respond quickly. If somebody calls you, you got to respond quickly. Our attention span is very short as a nation, or I guess even as a world. So people, they have a checklist. They want to know if they've called you, they have a demand, they want it met now. If you're doing it off-site, can you use a kiosk? There are a couple kiosk vendors in there, and they're very, very good. It's a fantastic way to have a remote site, and we have customers all over the country that have multiple sites that they're running from a kiosk. They can take payments, they can dispense a lock for you, they can dispense a map so you can see where the facility is. You've got cameras up that you can have a display and it shows you exactly where in the facility everything is, and everything can be seen. So you can have a truly unmanned facility. Or you can still, a lot of people do it old school, where you can still talk to, you answer the phone, meet people on site. This is an old customer of mine where he's got his little snack machine inside of that's his office there, by the way. And he's got his little snack machine where he's got keys to the unit in little matchbooks numbered. So he meets tenants there and then gives them that. He's got 300 units and he still runs it this way. Here's a little kiosk, just a small little covered canopy. Here he's got his buildings up. You can see a new building coming back in the next phase. He's got his camper parking out front. This is a small facility, but a Class A site with a nice looking kiosk vestibule. Here's a fancier office where he has the kiosk right now, but later on, as it gets bigger, he probably, and as an exit strategy, if he gets to 40, 50,000 square feet and he wants to sell the facility, he'll have an office already in place for the new buyers. Here's a little drone footage of that site I showed you with the little kiosk out in the front. It was built in 3 phases, or two phases. I don't actually have time for any questions because they have another one coming in. But if you have any questions, please email me on here, mlarson@tracti.com, or stop by and see us in our booth right when we enter in. I will be happy to answer any questions you have, or one of my other associates. Thank you so much for coming.